Hi there. So today I'm going to be reading The Crab Cannery Ship. This is a book I've wanted to read for ages. Oh, it's by Kobayashi Takiji. And it's about a bunch of workers on a ship who rise up against their exploiting oppressors. And that's all I know about it. It's like in Japan, I think the key example of what's called proletarian literature, which is a movement and genre that I don't really know anything about, but I'd love to learn. And today I'm in a little port town, so it seemed the ideal day to start reading. So let's get started. Crab cannery ships were considered factories, not ships. Therefore, maritime law did not apply to them. Ships that had been tied up for 20 years and were good for nothing but scrap iron, vessels as battered as tottering syphilitics, were given a shameless cosmetic makeover and brought to Hakodate. Hospital ships and military transports that had been honourably crippled in the Russo-Japanese War and abandoned like fish cuts turned up in port looking more faded than ghosts. If steam was turned up a little, pipes whistled and burst. When they put on speed while chased by Russian patrol boats, the ships began to creak all over as though about to come apart at any moment, and shook like palsied men. But none of that mattered in the least, for this was a time when it was everyone's duty to stand tall for the Japanese Empire. Moreover, the crab cannery ships were factories pure and simple, and yet factory laws did not apply to them either. Consequently, no other site offered such an accommodating setting for management's freedom to act with total impunity. It's hard to describe the reason why I like the atmosphere so much here at Mojikō, but it's to do with a lot of things. Like it's to do with the fact that it used to be a big international port, and be this big hub of activity from different parts of the world, and now it's a quiet little place. And also that these buildings, they were built in the Meiji Taisho period, so around the turn of the century, to look new and modern and like to symbolize Japan becoming a nation. And now they look old and foreign and Western. So it's so full of contradictions and hybrids and a strange connection to the past, as well as being quite peaceful and nice. And also just its geographical position. It's right at the very northern tip of Kyushu, which is the island that I live on. So, like, it's sort of like the edge of my home, or like my porch. It feels like whenever I've come back into Kyushu, like by bus, the bus always stops just on the other side of the Kamon Strait, which is the water here. And I look over and I sort of see Mojikō, and I think, yeah, I'm about to get home. So it's always had like a really nice feeling for me. And also like it's the edge of the world, or at least of my world, and that beyond it is Japan. It's Honshu, and it's Tokyo, Kyoto, all the famous places in Japan, but also the rest of the world, Korea, and other countries as well. Waves began to rise. Each time the ship swayed, candle flames tapered as if about to go out and then brightened again. The white cotton cloth that covered the dead face moved as though about to slide off. Watching the stirring fabric made the men shiver with an eerie sensation. The waves started to beat against the ship's sides. "Are you done yet?" demanded the manager now, showing his face through the opening in the shithole ceiling. "Yes," they muttered reluctantly. "Then take him away." "But first the captain's supposed to say a few words in his memory." "The captain? In his memory?" The voice brimmed with scorn. "You idiots! You think we got time for that?" There was no time for that. Mountains of crabs rose high on deck, their claws rustling and scraping against the boards. And so the dead youth was swiftly carried out and stowed unceremoniously, like a straw sack of salmon or trout, aboard a motor launch tied to the ship's stern. The majority swallowed the manager's suggestion that the Japanese were truly an outstanding people, and they felt somewhat consoled by the notion that their cruel daily sufferings seemed to have something heroic about it. When working on deck, they often saw a destroyer sailing south along the horizon. From the warship's stern fluttered the nation's flag, glittering red and white. Their eyes brimming with tears of excitement, the fishermen clutched their hats and waved. That destroyer, they thought, is the only friend we've got. So now I'm actually in a different country. I'm in Ireland, surprisingly. More on that later, I suppose. But for now, let's keep talking about the Crab Cannery Ship. I can tell you a bit more about the story now. The story is about this group of workers on a ship and how terrible things are. Like, they have to catch crabs, they have to can crabs, and life just gets worse and worse because of the terrible way that they're exploited by their bosses, especially their manager, who's called Asakawa, and I think he's the only character who gets a name in the whole thing. So there are kind of characters because, you know, there's a certain, like, the student and the one who used to be a miner and things like that. So you get a sense of, like, individuals. But, you know, the point of the story is that this is a story about a group of people who are struggling and who are going through, like, a shared struggle, and how they come together and how they, you know, the tension is building because we're just waiting for some sort of revolutionary moment to happen, right? As for the writing itself, it was really interesting. Like, I did a video not long ago about, well, actually probably quite a while ago now, but about things I don't like in writing, and metaphors was one of them, or, you know, like, overusing metaphors. But and by metaphors I also mean similes. But listen to this as an example of not what everything is like, but like what some stuff at the beginning is like. Hands and feet hung from bodies like radishes, frozen and devoid of sensation. The men all crawled into their bunks like silkworms, no one uttering a single word. Throwing themselves down, they grabbed hold of the iron rails. The ship bucked and shook desperately, like a horse struggling to drive a biting horsefly off its back. So that's just a little passage. Like, those aren't sentences that are taken, like, from different parts. Like, he really, like, strings all those similes together, and the horse thing and the boat being like a horse, like, just a few lines before, when there's a storm, it says the ship seemed frailer than a rabbit. So one second the ship is a rabbit, then it's a horse, and, like, out of context I can see, like, you could imagine how this could be seen as, like, really not good writing, or, like, almost, like, kind of juvenile, like everything has to be something else, but in the context of how, like, hellish this world is and how precarious the lives of these people are, it actually really works. Like, I loved it. Like, it's like everything is unstable, everything is constantly transforming into something else, like unpredictable. The ship is a rabbit, now it's a horse, you know what I mean? The people, their hands have turned into radishes, now they're silkworms. It's like everything has got this almost grotesque level of metaphor added to it. And I love it. So this is an example of metaphor that really works for me. Although, you know, I'm glad the whole book isn't like this. It's only, like, certain passages. But it's got this sort of, I would say, something that is, like, this is sort of representative of the style in the sense that it's quite violent, if that makes sense. Like, the imagery keeps shifting. Like, there's another bit where a guy spits and we follow the spit for a while, like, and what happens to the spit. If it was a movie, it would be like the camera can't stay still. It would constantly zooming in here and then following something and then zooming out and then cutting to this guy's face, and then, you know what I mean? So it's got a real, like, kind of sense of urgency and violence, I think, which is appropriate. It's totally appropriate for the message of the book. And yeah, getting onto the message of the book now. So this was something I was unsure about, like, how I would feel about it, because it's you know, proletarian literature, so it's got a very obvious political aim. The aim is to show us what life is like in Japan at this time, like early 1930s, maybe 1920s. I think it was, to give us a sense of injustice, and, you know, to convince us of a political stance, which is basically socialism, or I think more specifically communism. I'm not exactly sure, but it definitely feels like this is a communist book. Obviously people have different values and they'll respond differently to the story because the values are so on display. But like, I've been watching a lot of Sally Rooney on YouTube lately, and she talks about political stuff and how she's a Marxist and how that comes across in her books. And she basically says, you know, if she wanted to persuade people of something, of her ideology or whatever, then she would write an essay, but she wouldn't, or like, you know, something like a political tract or something. She wouldn't write a novel. So she's obviously of the opinion that you can't really write a novel which is trying to persuade someone of a political opinion. I definitely get where she's coming from, but this book, The Crab Cannery Ship, is like the opposite of that, because it's really shamelessly, wearing its heart on its sleeve, saying basically, I'm a communist, you should be a communist too. And there's just something really refreshing about that, I think. Obviously, you don't have to be a communist to enjoy the book. Like, I don't think I'm a communist, but I really enjoyed the book. And I enjoyed its honesty. You don't have to agree with the author or the narrator's stance, or you don't have to agree with the book's project to enjoy the book for what it is. And yeah, I really enjoyed the book. And if it had just been like these violent metaphors and imagery and people suffering, and the writer kind of shoving it down your throat a bit about socialism and stuff, then yeah, I think I would have gotten sick of the book really fast. So there were other things, like in the analysis basically of the workers, there were things which really surprised me. So they talk about Koreans, they talk about how they're Korean, there aren't Koreans on the boat, I think, but he does reference Koreans and Taiwanese as people who are obviously like colonial subjects of Japan, and how even the laborers don't have sympathy for them. So like while the book is constantly saying the reason this exploitation is happening is because of capitalism, it's also like, not making the workers into superheroes, right? They're not all perfect saints, even though the manager is basically a cartoon villain. But the workers themselves, they don't have any sort of critique of imperialism. And Kobayashi really wants us to realize that the workers have this flaw in their way of seeing the world, that they don't see how capitalism and imperialism are linked, even though it's quite clear to us through a lot of the quotations in the book. It's also just like kind of horrific. It was kind of like a horror novel at parts, and I didn't expect that. Lots of really gruesome descriptions, and also just chilling kind of eerie gothic things of of corpses and having to live in this sort of ghostly, ghastly world on the ship. It was, yeah, I really like boat stories, I think, so I think maybe that also appealed to me. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there because I've rambled on for long enough. But Kobayashi Takiji, The Crab Cannery Ship, Kani Kōsen, it was fantastic. I really liked it. I can see why it's a classic. I can see definitely why it became really popular after the financial crash. The recent one, I mean, like 2008. I think it became really popular like shortly after that, or around that time in Japan. There was like a boom, and that's really fascinating. I'll leave some links below for a YouTube channel I found that has some information on that, and also includes like a little news clip in Japanese about the boom of people reading this book. So obviously, even though it's written from a very specific communist point of view, from a specific Japanese part of history, people in modern society have found something in it which resonates, and I think I did too. So yeah, it was a great read. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.